Watch to the end. In this video, you will hear 3 stories. The last one will shock you.
After watching this story, you will cry. It can happen to you. Imagine what it would be like to be betrayed by a loved one, get rid of a previously loved one, learn the sad news about your wife and son's lover, and go to prison for the rest of your life. How will you feel and how will your life change? Watch to the end. This story is based on real events and has shocked millions of people. It will change your ideas about love and trust. The Cycle of Revenge. Chapter 1. Betrayal. Mark and Sarah had been married for 12 years, and they had been happy for most of that time. They built a life together, a cozy home, 2 children, and a shared dream of growing old together. Mark was a hard-working mechanic known for his dedication and honesty. Sarah, a nurse, was compassionate and caring, always putting others before herself. But over time, cracks began to appear in their marriage. The long hours Mark spent in the garage left him exhausted and distant, while Sarah felt increasingly lonely and unappreciated. They stopped talking, laughing, and chatting. The love that had once bound them was fading, replaced by resentment and silence. Sarah came home late one night, her cheeks flushed and her eyes sparkling in a way Mark hadn't seen in years. She claimed that she worked overtime at the hospital, but Mark couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. Over the next few weeks, Sarah's behavior became even more erratic. She spent more and more time on the phone, often running away to answer calls, and her excuses for being late became more and more unconvincing. Mark's suspicions grew, and one night, when Sarah was in the shower, he checked her phone. What he discovered shocked him. Sarah was having an affair with a man named Daniel, a doctor from her hospital. The messages were explicit, filled with declarations of love and plans for a future together. Sarah even told Daniel that she wanted to leave Mark and marry him. Mark was overwhelmed by a wave of emotions: anger, betrayal, and deep, aching sadness. He always trusted Sarah. He couldn't even imagine that she would betray him, but the evidence was irrefutable. That night, he came face to face with her, his voice shaking with rage. "How could you do this to me, in front of our family?" "What is it?" he asked. Sarah's face paled, but she didn't deny it. "I'm sorry, Mark. I never meant to hurt you, but I'm not happy anymore. I haven't been happy for a long time." Her words cut deeper than the betrayal itself. It seemed to Mark that his world was collapsing around him. He begged her to stay, to work on their marriage, but Sarah was adamant. She packed up and left, moving in with Daniel and filing for divorce. Every night he thought about what she had done, but he could not understand why she had done this to him. Mark tried to console himself by listening to music, going out with friends, and walking in the woods. A few days later, Mark's friend recommended him a book that told him how to forgive betrayal. Mark read this book, but it did not help him. He could not understand what prompted his wife, whom he loved, to leave him. Mark took care of his family, spent every day at work, getting tired like a serf. He hired a psychologist, but his long attempts to calm down were unsuccessful. The pills did not help, and in an attempt to forget what was happening, Mark began using illegal substances. He started having problems with his friends because he lost control of himself and often broke down. At night, Mark began to wake up because he was plagued by panic attacks and sometimes even sleep paralysis. His life became empty. He wanted nothing, because even the significant successes that suddenly began to occur in his life did not bring him pleasure. He was temporarily admitted to a psychiatric hospital. The food was good, and there was respect from the staff. He had a private room, for which he paid a lot of money. But nothing helped him. Every day seemed like the last for him, and after a while he decided. Chapter 2. Revenge. Mark was devastated. He couldn't eat, couldn't sleep, and couldn't focus on anything but the pain Sarah had caused him. He felt as if some part of him had died, and the only thing keeping him afloat was a burning desire for revenge. He started chasing Sarah and Daniel, watching their every move. He saw them together, laughing and holding hands, and it fueled his rage. He wanted them to suffer, to feel the same pain as he did. He wanted to destroy their happiness, as they had destroyed his. One night, Mark's anger reached a boiling point. He waited outside Daniel's apartment, watching as Sarah arrived and went inside. He sat in his car, gripping the steering wheel so tightly that his knuckles turned white. He had a knife with him, a weapon that he had taken from his garage. He didn't have a plan, but he knew he couldn't let them get away with it. When Sarah left the apartment a few hours later, Mark followed her. She was alone and walking to her car, unaware of the danger lurking in the shadows. Mark quietly approached her, his heart pounding in his chest. "Sarah," he said in a cold and firm voice. She turned around and her eyes widened in fear when she saw the knife in his hand. "Mark, what are you doing? Please don't do this." But Mark was beyond reasonable. He lunged at her, the knife slicing through the air. Sarah screamed, but it was too late. He pierced her, and she collapsed to the ground, her soul leaving her. Mark stood over her, his hands shaking as he realized the reality of what he had done. He wanted to take revenge, but now he only felt empty. He dropped the knife and ran, leaving Sarah's helpless body behind. Chapter 3. Consequences. The next morning, the police found Sarah's body, and it didn't take them long to put all the facts together. Mark was arrested a few hours later, guilt written all over his face. He didn't resist or try to explain himself. He just nodded when his rights were read out to him, resigned to his fate. The trial was fast and brutal. Mark pleaded guilty, saving everyone the agony of a lengthy trial. He was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. As he was led away in handcuffs, he felt a strange sense of relief. He got his revenge, but it cost him everything. Meanwhile, Daniel could only pick up the pieces. He was devastated by Sarah's fate, and he was tormented by guilt and grief. He blamed himself for what had happened, convinced that if he hadn't been stalking Sarah, she would still be alive. The severity of his guilt became unbearable. He believed that he had to protect her from this incident. One night, Daniel jumped off the window. Chapter 4. Torture. Mark's life in prison was a living hell. He was placed in a high-security institution surrounded by violent criminals who had no sympathy for the man who had eliminated his wife. From the moment he arrived, he became a target. Other prisoners considered him weak, an easy target for their brutality. They beat him, bullied him, and turned his life into a living nightmare. Mark tried to keep to himself, but he couldn't get rid of the constant torment. He was stripped of his dignity, humanity, and any semblance of hope. The guards turned a blind eye to the abuse, considering Mark to be nothing more than a monster who deserved everything he got. He was denied medical care, visits, and any chance of redemption. He was alone, trapped in pain and suffering. Chapter 5. Meeting with Mark. Mark has always been a man of few words, but the severity of his actions has turned him into a likeness of his former self. After serving 10 years of a life sentence, he became a quiet, self-absorbed man, spending his days in the prison library or writing letters to his children, letters he knew would never be sent. He accepted his fate, but the guilt of what he had done still haunted him. One day, when he was sitting in the visiting room, he was told that a visitor had come to him. It was an unusual occurrence, and no one had visited him for many years. When he was led to the booth, his heart was pounding and his hands were shaking as he picked up the phone. On the other side of the glass was his daughter, Lily. She was in her early 20s, but because of the pain in her eyes, she looked much older. Mark's breath caught in his throat. He hadn't seen her since the trial, and the sight of her now, so broken and tired, shocked him. "Lily," he said, his voice breaking, I do not know what to say." Lily didn't answer at first. She just stared at him, anger, sadness, and something else mixed in her eyes that he couldn't understand. Finally, she spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. "Ethan is gone, Dad." Mark's heart stopped. "What do you mean?" "He jumped off the window," Lily said, her voice breaking. 2 weeks ago. He couldn't take it anymore." It seemed to Mark that the ground had disappeared from under his feet. His son, his little boy, is missing. The weight of this news crushed him, and he leaned forward, pressing his forehead against the glass. "No," he whispered. "No, no, no, no." Lily's tears flowed freely, but her voice sounded flat, almost cold. "I've spent the last 2 weeks trying to figure out why. Why did he do it? Why did he think there was no other way out? And I keep coming back to you." Mark looked up, tears streaming down his face too. "Me?" "Yes, you are," Lily said, raising her voice. "Do you have any idea what it was like for us after what you did? Do you know what it's like to grow up knowing who your father is? So that everyone at school whispers about you? So that you don't have friends? Because their parents didn't want them around you? So that mom gets upset and goes into her own world, leaving us to fend for ourselves?" Mark opened his mouth to speak, but no words came out. He never allowed himself to think about how his actions affected his children. He was so consumed by guilt and pain that he ignored them, telling himself it was for the best. "Ethan couldn't handle it," Lily continued, her voice trembling. "He blamed himself for what happened. He thought that if he was a better son, maybe you wouldn't have. Maybe things would have been different. He carried this guilt with him every day, and it destroyed him." Mark felt as if he had been stabbed in the heart with a blade. "Lily, I am. I never wanted all this. I never meant to hurt you or Ethan. I was so angry, so confused." "But you hurt us," Lily interrupted in a harsh voice. "You're hurting us more than you can imagine. And now Ethan's gone, and I'm staying here trying to pick up the pieces. I don't even know how to mourn him because I'm so angry at him, at you, at Mom, at myself." Mark's shoulders shook with sobs. The weight of guilt and grief overwhelmed him. "I'm so sorry, Lily. I'm so sorry for everything. I never wanted this to happen." Lily looked at him, and there was a mixture of pity and anger in her eyes. "Regret won't bring Ethan back. Regret won't fix what you've broken. I don't even know why I came here. I guess I just wanted you to know what your actions cost us, what it cost him." Mark nodded shyly, lowering his head. "I don't expect you to forgive me. I don't deserve this. But please, Lily, don't let this ruin you too. You're all I have left." Lily stood up, pressing her palms against the glass. "You have no right to say that. You lost the right to call me your daughter the moment you pulled the trigger. I came here to tell you the truth, and now I've had enough. I never want to see you again." She hung up the phone and left, leaving Mark alone in the booth. It felt like he'd been sitting there for hours, replaying every word she'd said in his head. The weight of his guilt was unbearable, and for the first time in many years, he allowed himself to truly feel the pain he had caused. Chapter 6. Reflections. That night, lying in his cell, Mark thought about Ethan. He thought about the little boy who loved baseball, who always respected him, who believed that he would protect him. He thought about the kind of man Ethan had become, the man who carried the weight of his father's sins until it overwhelmed him. Mark now realized that his quest for revenge had destroyed not only his own life, but also the lives of those he loved the most. He was so engrossed in his anger and pain that he didn't notice the harm he was causing. As the years passed, Mark turned into a semblance of the man he once was. His body was covered with scars, both physical and emotional. He spent his days in silence, staring at the walls of his cell, haunted by the memories of what he had done. He thought about Sarah, the life they had lived together, and the love they had lost. He thought of Daniel, a man he had never really known, whose life had been ruined by his actions. He dreamed about Ethan every night. He was worried about what was happening to Lily now, who she was with, and whether she was alive. And he thought about himself, the choice he had made, and the consequences he faced. He wanted to take revenge, but all he did was destroy himself. He became the monster he had always feared, a man consumed by anger and hatred. And now he was paying the price. Staring at the ceiling, Mark made a silent vow with tears in his eyes. He will spend the rest of his life trying to atone for his sins, but not for himself, but for the sake of his children. He will honor his son's memory by becoming a better person, even if it is too late to fix anything. It was little consolation, but it was all he had left. The Reckoning. Chapter 1. The Perfect Life. James and Emily had been married for 15 years, and to the outside world, they were the epitome of happiness. They lived in a beautiful house in the suburbs. They had 2 children, and they enjoyed a comfortable lifestyle. James was a successful lawyer known for his sharp mind and unwavering dedication to his clients. Emily, a former teacher, decided to stay at home to raise her children. and they made this decision together. But at first glance, their marriage was far from perfect. Over the years, the passion that once defined their relationship has faded. James was often absorbed in work, spending long hours in the office and bringing stress home. Emily, feeling neglected and unappreciated, began to resent him. They rarely quarreled, but the distance between them grew every day. One evening, after a particularly grueling day at work, James returned home and found Emily dressed for going out. She was wearing an elegant red dress and high heels, and her hair was perfectly styled. She barely glanced at him as she grabbed her purse. "I'm meeting friends for dinner," she said casually. "Don't wait for me." James nodded, too exhausted to ask her questions. He poured himself a glass of whiskey and sank down on the couch, scanning his email. But something about Emily's behavior bothered him. She had been distant lately, talking more and more on the phone, and spending less and less time with him. He tried to shake it off, telling himself that he was thinking too much. Chapter 2. Opening. A few weeks later, James's suspicions grew stronger. Emily's nighttime walks became more frequent, and she often returned home with a faint smile on her lips, as if hiding some secret. One evening, while Emily was in the shower, James noticed that her phone was buzzing on the kitchen table. Against his better judgment, he picked up the phone. A message from an unknown number appeared on the screen. "I can't wait to see you again. Tonight was amazing." James's heart sank. He unlocked his phone. Emily still hadn't bothered to change her password and scanned her messages. What he discovered shocked him. Emily was having an affair with a man named David, a personal trainer whom she met at the gym. The messages were frank, filled with declarations of love and plans for a future together. James was overwhelmed by a wave of emotions, anger, a sense of betrayal, and deep, aching sadness. He had always trusted Emily, and he had never imagined that she would betray him. But the evidence was irrefutable. He spent the rest of the night pacing around the house, thoughts of revenge swarming in his head. Chapter 3. The plan. James wasn't the type to act on impulse. He was methodical, calculating, and patient. Over the next few weeks, he began to develop a plan. He wanted Emily to feel the same pain she had caused him, but he also wanted to make sure that her lover would pay the maximum price. He started by collecting additional evidence. He hired a private investigator to follow Emily and document her meetings with David. The investigator provided photographs, videos, and even audio recordings of their conversations. James also began monitoring Emily's social media accounts, noting the times she posted and the places she tagged. Meanwhile, he maintained the appearance of a loving husband. He took Emily on dates, bought her expensive gifts, and even planned a weekend trip. Emily, unaware that he knew about her affair, seemed to enjoy the attention. She began to wonder if James had changed, if it was possible to save their marriage. But James's kindness was just a trick. He was waiting for the right moment to strike. Chapter 4. Revenge. The opportunity came one evening when Emily told James she was going to yoga classes. He knew she was lying. She was dating David at a secluded cabin in the woods. James has already planned his move. He waited for Emily to leave, and then followed her in his car, keeping a safe distance, so that he would not be noticed. When Emily arrived at the cottage, James parked his car nearby and walked over. He watched from the shadows as Emily and David hugged, their laughter echoing through the night. The sight filled him with rage, but he remained calm, focused on his plan. He waited until they were inside, and then quietly walked towards the hut. He took with him a pistol, which he had illegally acquired for this purpose. He took a deep breath, bracing himself for what he was about to do. James kicked the door open, catching Emily and David off guard. They froze. Their eyes widened in fear when they saw the gun in his hand. "James, what are you doing?" Emily screamed in a trembling voice. "I'm stopping this," James replied coldly. "You betrayed me, Emily. And you," he said, turning to David, "you took everything from me." Before either of them could react, James pulled the trigger. The sound of the gunshot echoed through the cabin, and David fell lifelessly to the floor. Emily screamed and fell to her knees next to him. James froze in place for a moment, his hands trembling as he realized the reality of what he had done. He looked at Emily's pale, tear-stained face and felt a pang of regret. But it was too late to retreat. "You'll never forget this," he said in a cold and firm voice. "You're going to live with this for the rest of your life." He turned and left the hut, leaving Emily alone with the body of her lover. Chapter 5. The Accident. James drove away from the cabin, thinking feverishly. He knew he had to get rid of the gun and any evidence linking it to the crime. But as he raced along the dark, winding road, his thoughts were consumed by what he had done. He had crossed the line, and there was no turning back. Approaching a sharp turn, James lost control of the car. The tires screeched, and the car skidded off the road and crashed into a tree. The impact was strong. James was thrown forward. He hit his head on the steering wheel. When he regained consciousness, he was in excruciating pain. His vision was blurred, and he could barely move. He tried to reach for the phone, but it was out of reach. He was trapped, alone, and wounded. As he lay there, waiting for help that might never come, James's mind wandered. He thought about Emily, the life they had built together, and how it had all come crashing down. He was thinking about David, the man he had eliminated in a fit of rage, and he thought about himself, the choice he had made, and the consequences he faced. He wanted to take revenge, but all he did was destroy himself. Chapter 6. Consequences. James was found a few hours later by a passing motorist who called for help. He was rushed to the hospital, where he underwent emergency surgery. Doctors managed to save his life, but he suffered serious injuries, a broken leg, a fractured spine, and a traumatic brain injury that affected his memory and cognitive abilities. Emily, meanwhile, had to deal with the consequences of James's actions. She called the police, reporting the shooting and the accident. James was arrested as soon as his condition became stable enough to be transported, and the evidence against him was incontrovertible. The gun, the photos, the messages, all pointed to his guilt. The trial became a media sensation, with reporters flocking here to tell the story of a successful lawyer who eliminated his wife's lover. James pleaded guilty and meekly accepted his fate. He was sentenced to life in prison, a broken man who had lost everything. Emily was also broken. She had lost her lover, her husband, and the life she had known. She left, trying to start over, but the scars of that night would never fully heal. Chapter 7. Reflections. Years later, James sat in his prison cell, staring at the walls that had become his world. He had plenty of time to reflect on his choice, on the anger and pain that drove him to such a disgusting act. Now he realized that revenge had not brought him peace, it had only brought more pain. He thought of Emily, of the love they had once shared, and how it had all been destroyed by betrayal and rage. He thought of David, the man he had never really known, whose life he had taken in a moment of madness. And he thought about himself, about what kind of person he had become. He was so consumed by his thirst for revenge that he lost sight of what really mattered. He gave up his life, his family, and his future all for a fleeting moment of contentment. Sitting alone in his cell, James made a vow to himself. He will spend the rest of his life trying to atone for his sins, to find at least some kind of redemption in the darkness surrounding him. It was little consolation, but it was all he had left. The shadows of betrayal. Chapter 1. The perfect facade. Ethan and Clara had been married for 10 years, and to the outside world, they were the epitome of a perfect couple. They lived in a spacious suburban home, drove luxury cars, and hosted elegant dinner parties that left their friends envious. Ethan was a successful architect, known for his innovative designs and sharp business acumen. Clara, a former model, had transitioned into a career as a lifestyle influencer, sharing glimpses of their seemingly idyllic life with her thousands of followers. But behind closed doors, their marriage was far from perfect. Over the years, the spark that had once ignited their relationship had faded. Long work hours, missed anniversaries, and unspoken resentments had created a chasm between them. Clara often felt neglected, while Ethan believed he was doing everything he could to provide for their family. They rarely argued, but the silence between them was deafening. One evening, after a particularly grueling day at work, Ethan returned home to find Clara dressed to go out. She wore a sleek black dress that hugged her figure, her hair styled to perfection. She barely glanced at him as she applied a final coat of lipstick. "I'm meeting some friends for dinner," she said casually, slipping on her heels. "Don't wait up." Ethan nodded, too exhausted to question her. He poured himself a glass of whiskey and sank into the couch, scrolling through his emails. But something about Clara's behavior nagged at him. She had been distant lately, spending more time on her phone and less time with him. He tried to shake off the feeling, convincing himself he was overthinking. Chapter 2. The Discovery. A few weeks later, Ethan's suspicions grew stronger. Clara's late-night outings became more frequent, and she often returned home with a faint smile on her lips, as if she were hiding a secret. One night, while Clara was in the shower, Ethan noticed her phone buzzing on the kitchen counter. Against his better judgment, he picked it up. The screen lit up with a message from an unknown number. Asterisk. "Can't wait to see you again. Tonight was amazing. Asterisk." Ethan's heart sank. He unlocked the phone. Clara had never bothered to change the passcode and scrolled through her messages. What he found shattered him. Clara had been having an affair with a man named Daniel, a photographer she had met through her work. The messages were explicit, filled with declarations of love and plans for a future together. Ethan felt a surge of emotions: anger, betrayal, and a deep, aching sadness. He had always trusted Clara, never imagining she would betray him. But the evidence was undeniable. He spent the rest of the night pacing the house, his mind racing with thoughts of revenge. Chapter 3. The Plan. Ethan wasn't the type to act impulsively. He was methodical, calculating, and patient. Over the next few weeks, he began to formulate a plan. He wanted Clara to feel the same pain she had inflicted on him, but he also wanted to ensure that her downfall was as public as her infidelity had been private. He started by gathering more evidence. He hired a private investigator to follow Clara and document her meetings with Daniel. The investigator provided photos, videos, and even audio recordings of their conversations. Ethan also began to monitor Clara's social media accounts, noting the times she posted and the locations she tagged. Meanwhile, he maintained the facade of a loving husband. He took Clara out on dates, bought her expensive gifts, and even planned a weekend getaway. Clara, oblivious to his knowledge of her affair, seemed to enjoy the attention. She began to wonder if Ethan had changed, if perhaps their marriage could be salvaged. But Ethan's kindness was a ruse. He was biding his time, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. Chapter 4. The Revenge. The opportunity came during one of Clara's influencer events. She had organized a charity gala, inviting her closest friends, colleagues, and followers. The event was held at a luxurious hotel, with a red carpet, live music, and a silent auction. Clara was the center of attention, radiant in a sparkling gown as she mingled with guests. Ethan arrived late, dressed in a tailored suit and wearing a calm, composed expression. He made his way to the stage, where Clara was about to give a speech. The room fell silent as he took the microphone. "Thank you all for coming tonight," he began, his voice steady. "I know Clara has worked hard to make this event a success, but before she begins, there's something I need to share with all of you." Clara's smile faltered as Ethan pulled out a USB drive and handed it to the AV technician. Moments later, the large screen behind him lit up with images of Clara and Danielle kissing in a park, entering a hotel room, and sharing intimate moments. The room erupted in gasps and whispers. Clara's face turned pale. "Ethan, what are you doing?" she whispered, her voice trembling. "I'm exposing the truth," he replied coldly. "You betrayed me, Clara. You betrayed our marriage. And now everyone will know who you really are." The room was in chaos as guests began to take out their phones, recording the scandal unfolding before them. Clara tried to speak, to explain herself, but the damage was done. Her reputation, carefully cultivated over years, was crumbling in an instant. Chapter 5. The Aftermath. The fallout from the gala was swift and brutal. Clara's social media accounts were flooded with angry comments and unfollows. Brands she had partnered with dropped her, and her career as an influencer came to an abrupt end. Daniel, too, faced consequences. His photography studio lost clients, and his personal life was scrutinized by the public. Ethan filed for divorce, citing infidelity as the reason. The proceedings were bitter, with Clara fighting for a share of their assets. But Ethan had anticipated this. He had already transferred most of their savings into offshore accounts and hidden his assets. Clara was left with little more than the clothes on her back. For a while, Ethan felt a sense of satisfaction. He had exacted his revenge, and Clara had paid the price for her betrayal. But as the weeks turned into months, the emptiness inside him grew. He had achieved what he set out to do, but it hadn't brought him peace. Chapter 6. The Reflection. One evening, Ethan found himself standing in front of the house he and Clara had shared. It was empty now, a symbol of the life they had built together and the love they had lost. He realized that his quest for revenge had consumed him, leaving him as broken as Clara. He began to reflect on their marriage, on the mistakes they had both made. He had been so focused on his career that he had neglected Clara, taking her for granted. And Clara, in her loneliness, had sought comfort in someone else. Their marriage had been flawed, but it hadn't been beyond repair if only they had communicated, if only they had tried. Ethan knew he couldn't change the past, but he could choose how to move forward. He reached out to Clara, not to reconcile, but to apologize. They met at a quiet cafe, both of them wary and guarded. "I'm sorry," Ethan said, his voice heavy with regret. "I shouldn't have done what I did. I hurt you, and I hurt myself in the process." Clara nodded, tears in her eyes. "I'm sorry too. I never meant to hurt you. I was selfish and I made a terrible mistake." They talked for hours, sharing their pain and their regrets. It wasn't a happy ending, but it was a beginning, a chance for both of them to heal and move on. Chapter 7. The New Beginning. Ethan and Clara went their separate ways, but the lessons they learned stayed with them. Ethan focused on rebuilding his life, finding solace in his work, and reconnecting with old friends. Clara, too, began to rebuild, starting a small business, and finding fulfillment in helping others. Their story was a reminder that betrayal and revenge only lead to more pain. True healing comes from forgiveness, not just of others, but of oneself. And while their marriage was over, they both emerged stronger, wiser, and ready to face whatever the future held. The end. What do you think about this story? Write in the comments, subscribe, and wait for the next video. It will show you the true essence of a person who shocks you. If you don't subscribe, you will make a huge mistake.